Dr. Zara Kelaris had perfected the art of being invisible at exactly the wrong times. She could slip through the colony's industrial sectors like a ghost when maintenance schedules required her presence, but somehow became monumentally conspicuous whenever she needed basic supplies from the central market. It was a talent she'd never asked for and would gladly trade for the ability to buy groceries without causing an entire produce stand to develop sudden fascination with inventory management. The morning routine began at 4:30, 2 hours before anyone else stirred in the prefabricated hab units that dotted Kepler 186b's primary settlement. Zara's internal chronometer was more reliable than the colony's actual timekeeping systems, a side effect of too many years spent working alone with only mechanical precision for company. She dressed in the standard-issue engineering coveralls that marked her as colony technical staff, though the designation felt increasingly hollow given how few technical problems anyone actually asked her to solve. The waste reclamation facility hummed with the kind of mechanical contentment that Zara found more soothing than any human conversation she'd attempted in the last 6 months. The quantum filtration systems required daily calibration, work that was both essential and sufficiently unpleasant that no one questioned her monopoly on the task. She ran her hands along the primary processing units, feeling for the subtle vibrations that indicated optimal performance, and tried not to think about how this might be the closest thing to meaningful physical contact she'd experienced today. "Morning beauties," she murmured to the filtration arrays, checking their bioluminescent status indicators. Everyone feeling properly quantum today. The machines naturally didn't respond, but they also didn't flinch away from her presence or mutter about genetic contamination when they thought she couldn't hear them. It was an improvement over most of her social interactions. Zara's Vorthak heritage was visible in the elongated ears that marked her Altarian ancestry, but invisible in all the ways that actually mattered. No reality warping abilities, no quantum manipulation talents, no sign whatsoever of the powers that had made her bloodline legendary for all the wrong reasons. Just the genetic markers that showed up on medical scans and the historical records that made colony administrators nervous about insurance liability. 3 generations ago, a faction of Vorthak descendants had attempted to use their quantum abilities to establish a galactic empire. The effort had failed spectacularly, taking most of the bloodline with it and leaving survivors like Zara to carry the burden of crimes she'd never committed and powers she'd never manifested. It was, she reflected while adjusting a particularly stubborn resonance chamber, like being held responsible for a disaster committed by distant relatives she'd never met while using abilities she didn't possess. The irony was that her engineering work actually benefited from her Vorthak genetics. The same neural pathways that should have enabled quantum manipulation gave her an intuitive understanding of complex systems that made her far more effective at her job than anyone wanted to acknowledge. But acknowledging her competence would require admitting that Vorthak descendants might be useful for something other than cautionary tales. Zara finished the reclamation system calibrations and moved on to the secondary processing units, savoring the brief period of productive solitude before the colony awakened and began the daily ritual of pretending she didn't exist. The morning light filtering through the industrial sectors, transparent aluminum windows cast everything in shades of amber and gold, creating the illusion that even a backwater mining colony could be beautiful if you looked at it from the right angle. Her personal comm unit chimed with an incoming message, and Zara felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that accompanied any unexpected communication. Messages usually meant problems, equipment failures that required her expertise, administrative notifications about policy changes that somehow always seemed to restrict her activities further, or the occasional medical appointment reminder that served as a polite way of monitoring her genetic stability. This message was different. A formal work request, logged through proper channels, requesting her assistance with a critical systems failure in the primary atmospheric processor. Zara read it twice, certain there had to be some mistake. Major system failures were handled by the senior engineering team, who had made it abundantly clear that her participation wasn't welcome on high-visibility projects. She checked the request origin. Marcus Chen, Chief Systems Engineer. The name was unfamiliar, which suggested either a recent arrival or someone from outside the colony's usual bureaucratic channels. Either way, it was the first time in months that anyone had requested her help with something more complex than waste management or routine maintenance. Zara saved the message and tried to ignore the small spark of hope that threatened to disrupt her carefully maintained emotional equilibrium. Hope was dangerous. It made disappointment hurt worse, and she'd learned to prefer the steady ache of isolation to the sharp pain of rejected expectations. But as she completed her morning rounds and prepared for another day of carefully orchestrated invisibility, she found herself wondering what kind of person would send a direct work request to the colony's resident pariah. Either Marcus Chen was spectacularly uninformed about local social dynamics, or he was the kind of engineer who cared more about solving problems than managing political sensitivities. Zara wasn't sure which possibility was more appealing, but for the first time in longer than she cared to calculate, she was looking forward to finding out. Marcus Chen had seen colonial dysfunction before, but Kepler 186b was setting new standards for bureaucratic incompetence disguised as procedural caution. The atmospheric processor hadn't just developed a fault. It was systematically failing in ways that suggested either sabotage or the kind of cascade malfunction that turned routine maintenance into existential crisis. And the local engineering team's response had been to form a committee to discuss, forming a subcommittee, to evaluate the feasibility of scheduling preliminary assessments. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," Marcus said, reviewing the duty rosters in the colony's administrative center while fighting off a headache that felt suspiciously like bureaucracy-induced trauma. "Doctor, Calaris is your most experienced quantum systems specialist, but she's not assigned to any critical infrastructure projects." Administrator Hendricks, a man whose expression suggested chronic indigestion, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "There are considerations beyond simple technical qualifications, Mr. Chen. Colony safety protocols require us to maintain appropriate personnel assignments based on comprehensive risk assessments." "Risk assessments?" Marcus looked up from the personnel files, noting that Zara Calaris's technical qualifications were impressive enough to make him wonder why she wasn't running the entire engineering department. "What kind of risks are we talking about? Because from where I'm sitting, the biggest risk is the life support system that's currently degrading while your comprehensive personnel remain comprehensively useless." "Mr. Chen, I understand you're new to our community, but there are historical factors you may not fully appreciate. Historical factors don't fix atmospheric processors, Hendricks. Technical expertise does." Marcus stood up, already tired of the conversation and increasingly convinced that whatever political nonsense was keeping Calaris sidelined was going to get people killed. "I'm requesting her immediate assignment to the atmospheric processor repair team." Hendricks's expression shifted from uncomfortable to actively alarmed. That would be highly irregular, Doctor. Calaris hasn't worked on primary systems in over 2 years. The safety protocols will be my responsibility, since I'm the chief systems engineer and this is my decision." Marcus gathered up the personnel files, making a mental note to review them more thoroughly once he was somewhere with fewer nervous administrators. "Unless you'd prefer to explain to Colonial Command why we let essential infrastructure fail because of personnel policy concerns." 20 minutes later, Marcus was beginning to understand why the colonial administration preferred committees to actual engineering. The atmospheric processor's diagnostic readouts looked like someone had fed random numbers into a pattern generator, and the senior engineering team's attempted solutions had apparently involved hoping really hard that quantum mechanics would spontaneously reorganize itself to be more convenient. The resonance patterns don't make sense. Senior Engineer Patel was explaining with the confident tone of someone who had long since given up trying to understand the systems he was supposed to maintain. We've run every standard diagnostic, replaced all the obvious components, and recalibrated the quantum field generators twice. It should be working, but the output stability keeps fluctuating in ways that don't match any known failure modes. Marcus studied the diagnostic displays, noting several patterns that actually did make sense if you understood quantum field dynamics well enough to recognize what you were looking at. Have you considered that the fluctuations might be symptoms of field harmonics interference rather than component failure? Field harmonics interference. Patel's expression suggested Marcus had just proposed solving the problem through interpretive dance. The system doesn't have field harmonics. It's a standard atmospheric processor, not some experimental quantum manipulation device. Standard atmospheric processors on colonies with high ambient quantum radiation absolutely have field harmonics, Marcus replied patiently, especially when they're operating in proximity to other quantum-dependent systems. The interference patterns can create exactly the kind of resonance instabilities you're describing. The rest of the engineering team exchanged glances that suggested Marcus had either demonstrated superior technical knowledge or confirmed their suspicions that all newcomers were dangerously insane. Marcus was beginning to suspect that the colony's technical problems might be more widespread than just the atmospheric processor. So how do we fix field harmonics interference? Asked Junior Engineer Williams, who seemed genuinely interested in solutions rather than just committee formation. You need someone who understands quantum field theory well enough to identify the interference sources and calculate compensation algorithms. Marcus pulled up Dr. Kelaris's technical files on his personal tablet. According to these records, you have exactly that kind of expertise available. She's published papers on quantum field harmonics in industrial applications. The sudden silence that followed his statement was so complete that Marcus could hear the atmospheric processors' struggling ventilation systems in the background. Senior Engineer Patel's expression had shifted from confused to actively horrified, as if Marcus had suggested inviting a live explosive device to help with the repairs. Mr. Chen, Patel said carefully, I don't think you understand the situation with Dr. Kelaris. There are concerns about her background that make collaboration with her inadvisable. What kind of concerns? Genetic concerns, Williams said quietly. She's Vorthak descendant. The bloodline carries quantum manipulation abilities that could, well, they could be dangerous if they manifested unexpectedly. Marcus stared at them, trying to process the implications of what he was hearing. You're telling me that you've excluded your most qualified quantum systems expert from quantum systems work, because she might theoretically develop abilities that could theoretically cause problems that you can't actually specify. It's not theoretical, Patel protested. The Vorthak uprising 3 generations ago killed billions of people. Her ancestors used quantum manipulation abilities too. Her ancestors, Marcus interrupted, are not her. And even if she does carry latent abilities, that would make her more qualified to work on quantum systems, not less. He looked around at the engineering team, seeing fear and prejudice disguised as professional caution. How long has she been excluded from major projects? Since the genetic screening results were uploaded to her personnel file, Williams admitted. About 2.5 years. Marcus felt something that might have been anger building in his chest. 2.5 years of excluding their best quantum engineer from quantum engineering work, while critical systems degraded and essential repairs went unfinished. It was the kind of institutional dysfunction that made frontier colonies fail, disguised as safety policy. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, closing his tablet and preparing to leave, "I'm going to solve this problem. If Dr. Kelaris is half as competent as her credentials suggest, we'll have the atmospheric processor running properly within a week. If she turns out to be a dangerous quantum manipulator bent on galactic conquest, I'll take full responsibility for unleashing her on our struggling life support systems." He was already walking toward the door when Patel called after him. "Mr. Chen, are you sure about this? She's been isolated for a long time. She might not even be willing to help." Marcus paused in the doorway, thinking about 20 years of frontier engineering and all the problems that could have been solved faster if people had worried less about who was doing the work and more about whether the work actually got done. "Only one way to find out," he said. Marcus found Dr. Kelaris at 547, precisely where the duty roster said she would be. Alone in Industrial Sector C, troubleshooting a water reclamation unit that had apparently been giving the maintenance team fits for the better part of a week. She was elbow-deep in quantum filtration components, her elongated ears twitching slightly as she listened to sounds that Marcus couldn't detect, and she didn't notice his approach until he was close enough to see the intricate diagnostic patterns she'd drawn on the unit's access panel. "Dr. Kelaris," Marcus said, keeping his voice conversational, "I'm Marcus Chen, the new Chief Systems Engineer. I sent you a message about the atmospheric processor situation." Zara went very still for a moment, and Marcus got the distinct impression she was running through multiple response scenarios before settling on basic politeness. "Mr. Chen, I received your message." She straightened up, wiping her hands on a maintenance cloth, and Marcus noticed that her fingers were stained with the distinctive blue residue that indicated direct contact with quantum processing elements. "I wasn't sure if it was genuine." "Genuine how? People don't usually request my assistance with primary systems anymore. I thought it might be some kind of administrative error, or—" She trailed off, and Marcus realized she'd been about to suggest that his message might have been some kind of practical joke. The casual cruelty of that possibility hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. Not an error. The atmospheric processor is developing quantum field instabilities that nobody on the current team seems capable of diagnosing, let alone fixing. According to your technical files, you've published extensively on field harmonics in industrial applications. Zara's expression shifted from cautious politeness to something that might have been surprise, then quickly to professional interest. "Field harmonics, that's actually fascinating. Most atmospheric processors don't generate significant harmonic interference unless they're operating in environments with high ambient quantum radiation or proximity to other quantum-dependent systems." She paused, studying his face as if trying to determine whether he was genuinely interested in the technical discussion. "What kind of instabilities are you seeing?" Marcus pulled out his tablet and showed her the diagnostic readings, watching as her eyes tracked across the data with the focused intensity of someone who genuinely understood what she was looking at. Her expression brightened noticeably, and for the first time since he'd arrived on Kepler 186b, Marcus felt like he was talking to another real engineer. "Oh, this is elegant," Zara said, scrolling through the readings with growing excitement. "Look at these resonance patterns. They're not random fluctuations at all. They're interference harmonics created by the interaction between your atmospheric processor and—" She looked up at him with something approaching delight. "Mr. Chen, how many other quantum-dependent systems are operating within a kilometer of the processor facility?" "Let me think. The main power distribution grid, the water treatment plant, the waste reclamation systems, and the mining equipment depot." Marcus watched as Zara's face lit up with understanding. "I take it that's significant." "Significant. It's practically a textbook case of cascading quantum interference. Your atmospheric processor isn't malfunctioning. It's trying to synchronize with every other quantum system in the colony, and the harmonic conflicts are creating the instabilities. Zara was practically bouncing on her feet now, her earlier caution forgotten in the face of a genuinely interesting technical challenge. This is the kind of problem I used to write theoretical papers about. I never thought I'd see such a clear example in practical application. Marcus felt something that might have been relief settling in his chest. Whatever social dynamics had led to Zara's isolation, her technical competence was exactly what the situation required. So you think you can fix it? Fix it, Mr. Chen? I can do better than fix it. I can optimize the entire quantum field network for maximum efficiency and minimal interference. Your atmospheric processor will run better than it has since installation, and as a bonus, you'll probably see improvements in the performance of every other quantum system in the colony. She paused, her enthusiasm dimming slightly. Assuming, of course, that the senior engineering team is willing to work with me. The senior engineering team will work with whoever I tell them to work with, Marcus said firmly. And right now, I'm telling them to work with the person who actually understands the problem we're trying to solve. Zara studied his expression for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was serious or setting up some elaborate disappointment. Mr. Chen, I should mention that there are complications with my background that some people find concerning. My genetic heritage includes markers for Vorthak bloodline traits, which makes some colonists uncomfortable about my involvement in critical systems work. Dr. Kelaris, I've spent 20 years fixing impossible problems on frontier colonies. In my experience, the people who can actually solve technical challenges are worth their weight in rare metals, regardless of their genetic background or what their great-grandparents might have done. Marcus closed his tablet and extended his hand to her. The only thing I care about is whether you can make our life support systems work properly. Everything else is politics, and I don't have time for politics when people's lives depend on functional infrastructure. Zara looked at his extended hand for a moment, then reached out and shook it with the kind of firm grip that suggested she was used to working with her hands. In that case, Mr. Chen, I think we should start with a comprehensive analysis of the quantum field interactions throughout the colony. I'll need access to the diagnostic systems for all the major installations, and probably a team of technicians who can handle the calibration work, while I focus on the theoretical calculations. Done. When can you start? I can start right now, assuming you don't mind me finishing this water reclamation repair first. It's been giving the maintenance team trouble all week, and I think I've finally identified the root cause. She gestured toward the open access panel, where her diagnostic markings had evolved into what looked like a complex mathematical proof. Quantum filtration systems require a delicate balance between efficiency and stability, and someone had been trying to optimize for maximum throughput without considering the harmonic resonance effects. Marcus looked at the diagnostic markings, recognizing the mathematical elegance even if he couldn't follow all the specific calculations. How long will that take? About 15 minutes if I'm right about the resonance calibration adjustments. Zara was already returning her attention to the filtration components, her hands moving with the confident precision of someone who understood the technology at a fundamental level. After that, we can tackle your atmospheric processor. As Marcus watched her work, he found himself wondering how the colony's engineering problems had been allowed to persist for so long, when they apparently had someone this competent available. The answer, unfortunately, was probably the same kind of institutional prejudice and bureaucratic dysfunction that plagued most frontier settlements, but at least now he knew how to fix it. Dr. Kelaris, he said, I think this is going to be the beginning of a very productive professional relationship. Zara looked up from her work, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. It was a genuine expression of happiness, and Marcus realized that it had probably been a long time since anyone had offered her the simple dignity of being treated as a colleague. I hope so, Mr. Chen. I really do. 3 months later, Marcus was beginning to think that Dr. Zara Kalaris might be the most competent engineer he'd ever worked with, which made the current crisis particularly ironic. The massive solar flare that had struck Kepler 186b 6 hours ago had damaged the colony's primary shield generators in ways that conventional repair methods couldn't address. And the one person who might be able to fix the problem was standing in the emergency command center, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. The quantum field disruptions are too severe for standard recalibration procedures. Senior Engineer Patel was explaining to the assembled crisis response team. His earlier skepticism about Zara's involvement having evaporated around the time her atmospheric processor optimization had improved colony air quality by 30%. We're looking at complete shield failure within 18 hours, unless we can stabilize the field harmonics. Marcus studied the diagnostic readings on the main display, noting patterns that reminded him uncomfortably of theoretical problems he'd read about, but hoped never to encounter in practice. What about emergency protocols, backup systems? The backup generators are functioning normally, but they can't compensate for the quantum-level disruptions in the primary shield matrix, Zara said quietly. She'd been unusually subdued during the crisis briefing, and Marcus was beginning to suspect he knew why. The solar flare didn't just damage our equipment, it created quantum interference patterns that are actively fighting our attempts to restore normal field stability. Administrator Hendricks, who had spent the last 3 months grudgingly accepting Marcus's personnel decisions, looked around the command center with the expression of someone watching his career prospects evaporate in real time. Options, people, what are our options? Evacuation, suggested Junior Engineer Williams. If we can't fix the shields, we evacuate the colony before the next solar event hits. Evacuation takes 48 hours minimum, Marcus pointed out. We don't have 48 hours, and even if we did, abandoning the colony means losing 2 years of infrastructure investment and leaving the mining operation to competitors. Zara had been quiet throughout the discussion, but Marcus noticed that she was studying the quantum field readings with the intense concentration she usually reserved for particularly challenging technical problems. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. There might be another option, but it would require. She trailed off, looking around at the assembled colonists with an expression that might have been fear or anticipation. It would require me to attempt something I've never tried before. Something that might not work, and that could potentially be dangerous if I'm wrong about my capabilities. The command center went very quiet. Marcus felt understanding dawning as he realized what Zara was suggesting, and why she looked so reluctant to suggest it. You think you might be able to manipulate the quantum fields directly? I don't know. I've never manifested any Vorthak abilities, but the theoretical framework for quantum field harmonization is something I understand better than anyone else on the colony. Zara's elongated ears were twitching with nervous energy. The quantum disruptions from the solar flare have created exactly the kind of complex interference patterns that Vorthak quantum manipulation was historically most effective at resolving. Administrator Hendricks made a sound that might have been a whimper. Dr. Kalaris, with all due respect, the risks. The risks are that I might not be able to help, in which case we're exactly where we are now, Zara interrupted, showing more assertiveness than Marcus had ever seen from her. Or the risks are that I might actually have inherited quantum manipulation abilities, in which case I might be able to save the colony. Or you might lose control and make the situation worse, Patel said, though his tone suggested he was raising the concern out of obligation rather than conviction. Senior Engineer Patel, Marcus said, in your professional opinion, what are our chances of fixing the shield generators using conventional methods? Patel looked at the diagnostic displays, then back at Marcus. Honestly, maybe 15%. The quantum disruptions are too severe for any repair techniques we have available. Marcus turned to Zara, seeing determination warring with uncertainty in her expression. And in your professional opinion, what are the chances that attempting quantum manipulation would make the situation worse? Lower than the chances of everyone dying if we do nothing, Zara said firmly. Marcus, I've been studying quantum field theory for most of my adult life. If I do have latent Vorthak abilities, I understand the theoretical framework well enough to use them safely. And if I don't have the abilities, then attempting to use them won't accomplish anything except wasting time we don't have anyway. Marcus looked around the command center, seeing fear and hope and desperate calculation in roughly equal measure. It was the kind of decision that defined careers and colonies, the moment when conventional wisdom had to give way to desperate innovation. Administrator Hendricks, Marcus said, as Chief Systems Engineer, I'm recommending that we authorize Dr. Kelaris to attempt quantum field manipulation to stabilize the shield generators. Hendricks stared at him, probably calculating political consequences and insurance liability in real time. This is highly irregular. This is a crisis situation where irregular solutions are exactly what we need, Marcus replied. Dr. Kelaris, if you're willing to try this, you have my full support. Zara nodded, taking a deep breath that seemed to steady her nerves. I'll need direct access to the shield generator control systems, and probably everyone except essential personnel should maintain safe distance in case something goes wrong. 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself standing in the shield generator facility, watching Zara prepare for what might be the most significant moment of her life. She had connected herself to the quantum field control systems through a jury-rigged neural interface that looked distinctly improvised and potentially dangerous. But her expression was calm, with the kind of focused concentration Marcus, associated with really good engineers solving really difficult problems. Marcus, she said without opening her eyes, if this doesn't work or if it works too well, I want you to know that these last 3 months of actually being treated like a colleague have been the best part of my life on this colony. Zara, it's going to work. And even if it doesn't, you're still the most competent engineer I've ever met, Vorthak heritage or no Vorthak heritage. She smiled at that, and Marcus felt the quantum fields around them begin to shift in ways that his instruments could detect, but his senses couldn't quite process. The neural interface began to glow with soft blue light, and the shield generator's diagnostic readings started showing patterns that looked almost like music made visible. What happened next was probably the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever witnessed in 20 years of engineering. Instead of the raw power he'd been expecting, Zara's quantum manipulation manifested as something approaching artistry, a delicate, precise harmonization of the colony's quantum fields that transformed chaotic interference patterns into elegant, stable configurations. The shield generators didn't just return to normal function. They began operating with efficiency levels that exceeded their original design specifications. When it was over, Zara opened her eyes and looked around the facility as if seeing it for the first time. "Oh," she said softly, "oh, that's what it feels like." "How do you feel?" Marcus asked. "Like I finally understand what I was meant to do with my life." Zara disconnected from the neural interface, her hands trembling slightly but her expression radiant with discovery. "Marcus, I can feel every quantum system in the colony. They're all connected, all part of one enormous harmonious network. It's incredible." Marcus checked the shield generator diagnostics, confirming that the crisis had been resolved more thoroughly than anyone had dared hope. "Zara, I think you just saved everyone on this colony." "We saved everyone on this colony," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this without someone who believed that I was worth the risk." Over the following days, as news of Zara's heroic shield repair spread throughout the colony, Marcus watched the social dynamics that had defined her isolation begin to transform. It started with individual colonists approaching her to express gratitude, evolved into requests for her expertise on various technical problems, and eventually became something Marcus had never expected to see. Genuine acceptance. The breakthrough came when 8-year-old Tommy Morrison, whose mother had spent months teaching him to avoid the dangerous lady, marched up to Zara in the colony's central plaza and announced that he wanted to be a quantum engineer when he grew up, just like her. The conversation that followed, with Tommy's mortified mother looking on, somehow evolved into Zara offering to teach basic quantum theory to any young colonists who were interested. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked her after the first impromptu science lesson, watching a group of fascinated children pepper Zara with questions about quantum field harmonics and reality manipulation. Teaching the next generation about quantum engineering seems like it might make some parents nervous. "The children aren't afraid of me," Zara replied, watching Tommy attempt to explain quantum superposition to his younger sister, with the earnest enthusiasm of someone who only half understood the concept himself. They see someone who can make things work better, not someone carrying genetic time bombs. Maybe if they grow up understanding that Vorthak abilities are tools rather than weapons, they won't repeat their parents' mistakes. Marcus nodded, thinking about prejudice and fear and the way that understanding could sometimes overcome both. "For what it's worth, I think you're right. About the children, about the abilities, about all of it." "Marcus," Zara said quietly, "thank you, not just for believing in my technical competence, but for treating me like a person when everyone else treated me like a problem to be managed. I know it sounds dramatic, but you literally saved my life when you decided to ignore the social protocols and just ask for help with a broken machine. Zara, you saved your own life when you decided to trust me enough to try something that scared you. I just provided the broken machine." She laughed at that, a sound of genuine happiness that Marcus realized he'd been hearing more often lately. Around the colony plaza, other colonists were going about their daily business with the casual efficiency of a community that had learned to function as a community rather than a collection of fearful individuals avoiding each other. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. "You've proven that Vorthak abilities aren't inherently dangerous. The colony's technical systems are running better than they have in years, and you're apparently becoming the most popular science teacher on Kepler 186b. What's next for Dr. Zara Kellaris?" Zara considered the question, looking around at the colony that had finally become something approaching a home. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd like to help other colonies that might have similar problems. Technical challenges that require unconventional solutions, social dynamics that prevent competent people from contributing to their communities, engineering problems that could benefit from Vorthak quantum manipulation techniques." "That sounds like the beginning of a very interesting career." "It does, doesn't it?" Zara smiled, and Marcus realized that isolation and fear had been replaced by possibility and purpose. "Though I think I'd like to keep working with a certain chief systems engineer who believes that problems should be solved by whoever can solve them, regardless of what their genetic background might suggest about their theoretical capabilities." Marcus grinned back at her. "I think that could be arranged. After all, the universe is full of broken machines that need fixing, and life is too short to worry about who's doing the fixing as long as it gets done properly." As they walked back toward the engineering complex, Marcus reflected on the simple truth that had started everything. Sometimes the best way to help someone was to treat them like they didn't need help, like they were capable, competent colleagues whose contributions were valued rather than problems whose existence required careful management. It was a lesson that had saved a colony, transformed a community, and proved that connection could overcome even the deepest prejudices when people were willing to see past their assumptions about what others might be capable of. The broken machine that had brought them together was long since repaired, but the partnership it had created was just beginning.